day of 2025. Time to do some goal setting for the year.
So let's chat about some ins and outs for the year. Over the past few years, I've gotten to kind of a good New Year's routine. I feel like it's a decent amount of reflecting, but not too much, and then a decent amount of goal setting, but also not too much. And in terms of my actual very specific goal setting, I use Rowena Sai's kind of method on YouTube. I'll link it down below, but it's really, really helpful. It runs you through sort of like your priorities for the year as well as your values, and then it leads you all the way to thinking of like daily/weekly habits that you can do to make sure that your goals kind of actually come true. And for me, it's been a lot more effective and sort of inspiring than like resolutions or anything like that, so I'd really recommend it. But last year I tried the sort of ins and outs trend for the first time, and I just thought it was really fun, and I feel like it's a lot more casual and like kind of goofy and just easier to share with people too. So I wanted to kind of talk through mine for 2025, and I divided into like 3 categories. We've got reading, fashion, and then sort of like personal or lifestyle ins and outs. So just to start with reading, for my ins, I have evening reading. I've been really wanting to read more in like sort of bigger chunks of time instead of just picking up books like, you know, whenever I have a free second. And I find that evenings are the best time just because they're when I want to wind down. And I also find that I rot a lot in the evenings, and I would rather not do that. I think I definitely like to pick up a book instead of going on my phone. Next in is highlighting books. I had a season of being like a huge annotator with the pen and everything and like writing my thoughts, and then a season of like not writing anything in my physical books, and now I've settled on just highlighting. This helps me remember my favorite quotes, and it also keeps me more involved as a reader. But I think writing and things is still like feels too much like school for me. I don't really want to do that. So yeah, good medium. Then we have chatting about books with other people and also reading more of other people's recommendations. This channel has played such a big role in this, and I hope it will continue to do so in 2025. Our virtual book club is so much fun, and we get to talk about books monthly, and I really missed having a space like that. And then I also hope to build a sort of running recommendation sort of TBR list from y'all's recommendations as well as sort of other fellow booktubers. I think that would be really fun. Yeah, and then in terms of the types of books I read, I have 2 ins, which are classics and more Korean books. Very strange and kind of hard to explain, but occasionally I just really want to read classics, and I want to sink myself in sort of literature that feels like it stood the test of time for some reason, and this is that year. I think it's because I've read a lot of contemporary litfic in the past couple of years, and honestly I'm kind of tired by it by now, except for translated literature, and so I hope to kind of get into like the oldies but the goodies this year, and then also reading more Korean books, partially just for myself to know what's going on in the Korean literary sphere, going to more book talks and stuff in Seoul, and then also for my job, so that I know what's going on and what sort of books I might translate, etc. And now some bookish outs. I want to get rid of the pressure to read certain books just because they're popular, or I feel like I need to give my thoughts on them for some reason, or like it'll make me a better reader online. On that note, another out for this year is contemporary American literary fiction. Obviously there will be some exceptions, and I have found some like litfic authors that I really like in the past couple of years, but overall I find it kind of oversaturated with the same like MFA voices and very dull. They're always like very solid 3-star reads, and none of them really blow me off my feet. And a reason for that I've also written in my outs is sort of cynicism for cynicism's sake in books, and I find that a lot with litfic. I think it's also like a generational thing. Like, do we have much to look forward to as a generation? You know, debatable, but I just don't find like cynical, pared down, like kind of sad or snarky writing that interesting anymore, unless it's done with a lot of genuine emotion and it's from the heart. I feel like the MFA world just wants all of us to overanalyze every single conversation we have and decision we make in our lives, and that is just not that interesting to me. As you guys could probably tell from my favorite books of last year, I want to read books that have a lot of community, a lot of love, a lot of relationships, just a lot of life in them, or if it's about a lack of life, I want it to be interesting and new. So yeah, maybe just sharpening my taste for this year and seeing what cutting those books out really does for me. And now for some fashion ins and outs. I'm actually quite excited about these because I think they could make a good change in my sort of fashion habits. In terms of my ins, I have natural fibers and composition checks when I'm buying clothing. I've talked about this in my favorites video, but it's just something I've really realized over 2024, and I think a lot of people have as well. I'm really looking for mostly 100% natural fiber clothing now. I find them so much more comfortable and chic, and I love the way that they fall on people's bodies. Another in is wish listing. I'm hoping this will keep my purchases a lot more intentional for the year. And then next we have playing with my hair and nails. Obviously that has not started happening yet, but I'm really hoping to try sort of different hairstyles and like braids and things like that, and then also sort of try and paint my nails regularly this year, have a little bit more fun, add that extra element to an outfit. I feel like it adds so much. And then as an antidote to Pinterest, which is on my outs list, we have an in of real life inspo from old people in particular. I love seeing people who have really aged into their style and who have clothes that they've worn for years and you can really tell. And honestly, living in Seoul, I see a ton of stylish sort of like elderly people on the streets and I get so inspired by them. I feel like it's very classic and they're not worried about like trends or impressing Instagram or anything, so I'm very inspired by their stuff. On that note, another in is classic silhouettes. This is something I realized I really loved in 2024 and I hope I can find more of that. And then lastly, we have color. I want to play a little bit more with color in 2025, particularly with accessories and things like nails, like I mentioned before, because I really do like the color palette of my existing wardrobe, but I just think a little bit more pops of color could be really fun. And then in terms of my fashion outs, my first is going on weekly thrift runs. This is very dangerous for my wallet and it's also just so unintentional. And so like I mentioned, I'd like to wish list more and kind of go with something in mind, or go infrequently enough that when I find something it really feels really exciting instead of like just sort of like a pattern of consumption that is not very good for my wallet or for my wardrobe. Then we also have more shoes. I really don't need any more shoes in my life. I find that shoes are one of those things where I honestly only gravitate towards like 3 pairs anyway, and so I almost would rather wear them to death and replace them. So yeah. Speaking of composition, I also want to stop wearing anything hot or itchy. I'm so done with being uncomfortable in my clothes, and so I actually donated some really itchy sweaters that I actually loved, but I was like, there's just no way I'm going to wear these if I have other nicer, not itchy sweaters. And also anything like that makes me overheat or anything. I just want to be super comfortable in the stuff I wear and make sure I can wear it in all sorts of situations. And lastly, kind of going along with the taking inspo from real life people, I want to stop looking at trend reports. Honestly, the trend cycles move so fast and I am not interested in trying to be trendy. I don't know why I keep looking at trend reports anyway. I feel like the big trends I'll see out and about no matter what, so I just don't need to be online in that sphere worrying about if I need to get new items or like what things I can push to be on trend or whatever. In terms of my ins, I have monthly goal check-ins and sort of reflections and also social rituals. I really want to find regular sort of social activities or rituals with my friends. And then I also have paperback books, regular morning walks, and mocha pot coffee. And then I also have a solo trip. I really like to go on a solo overnight trip this year just because I think that would be nice for my personal growth. I've never done it. I have gone on day trips, but I really enjoy traveling. I enjoy solo traveling, and I think it would be a really cool sort of experience, especially if I could just go within Korea, don't have to make it a big deal. I think that would be really fun. And then lastly, I have sort of like more cultural excursions. I really want to go to more movie and sort of theater nights, book talks. Again, like I mentioned, anything to give me inspo that's not online, I feel like at this point I am feeling really rejuvenated by, and I'd particularly like to go to the theater more this year because I watched like 3 movies in 2024 and it was not cute. And then lastly, to end with my outs, which I really hope are gone from my mind and my life this year, number 1 is procrastination. We're not procrastinating anymore in 2025 because it's so useless and it just makes me feel more anxious. Especially tiny tasks, just plan them out and get them done when they're presented to you is what I hope to do. Second is the late night doom scroll. We've all been there. I don't even need to talk about it. Third is a little bit more personal, but it's punishing my mind about how my body feels. Again, to get a little bit more vulnerable, I think like a lot of people since the pandemic, I have had increased sort of health anxiety / as an actual result of not exercising. I can feel more like achy or sort of like tired, and oftentimes I'll feel sort of like guilty or almost even anxious about it. But I'm hoping this year I can actually just turn that into getting out of the house and going on a walk or going to yoga or like swimming or running or biking or whatever, instead of like, you know, trying to punish myself for my body's natural sort of cycles and feeling more tired certain days, etc. And the last 2 are connected. It's sort of mindless consumption and then worrying about finances. I just don't think this is necessary. I'm pretty good about logging my expenses throughout the end of 2024, and so I really want to carry that into this year, and then also just really manage sort of my savings and finances so that I feel solid and secure and like I'm providing for my future self as well. So yeah, maybe we'll check in at the end of this year or the start of the next and see how I did on these ins and outs. But it's always really nice just to give yourself a tiny bit of encouragement, and also just writing down things that have been kind of bogging you down. The outs is so nice. It feels like burning your fears or something. So hopefully that gave you guys some inspo or encouragement, and I'd really like to know what your ins and outs are. If you want to list them in the comments, I think that would be super fun. Yeah. So welcome to my bookshelf at home. Because I have been moving around so much and I didn't go to college close to home and I lived in dorms for 4 years, the whole shebang, this is the biggest sort of book collection that I have in my life. For example, at my place in Seoul, I have like maybe 10 books that I've collected over the past like couple of months living there, but I didn't bring like a huge bookshelf with me. And so I like to think of this as sort of the chaotic collection that I have gathered over the past few years. There's a lot of stuff in here, everything from required reading from my high school to required reading in college to just like things that I've really enjoyed or books I picked up at book festivals. But it's not organized in any way except for height. It's not by author or genre or anything, which is definitely a sign that it's not being used, which makes me a little sad. Since I don't use this bookshelf for anything other than storage, there's no real problem with that. So that's not what we're going to tackle today. Hopefully one day when I move all these books into sort of a more permanent home, I will be able to organize them beautifully and kind of set up my own system. But what I wanted to do today is, for the new year, I kind of want to go through my bookshelf and look through the physical books that I have already and pick out the ones that I want to reread or I haven't gotten to yet and want to read in 2025. Some of you guys might know this already, but I'm really not a huge TBR girly. Like, I don't like to set up a list of books for the year or for a month. Even though I usually have a rough sense of what books I'd like to read, I just think having an official TBR feels a little bit too rigid for me, because to me the fun is picking a book that you're feeling at that moment, and that can change at any time. So what I like to do is just sort of pick out some books that I can select for this year and get to if I have the time, or bring with me to Korea. And also I just thought it'd be fun to go through my bookshelf and show you guys some of my favorites if I come across them. So yeah, I'll start with the top shelf and just go through all the ones that I haven't read yet and then decide if I want to get to them this year or if there are any ones that I'd like to reread this year as well, because I've been really enjoying my reread sort of era. We got our first contender, Snow by Orhan Pamuk. I hope that's how you say his name. I'm not really sure. But I know he also wrote My Name is Red, and that is also very famous. He's a Nobel Prize winning author from Turkey. And so maybe I'll get to My Name is Red this year as well as this one. One of my goals this year is to read more classics, and I'm not necessarily going to reread In Cold Blood, but I just want to say this is one of the craziest classics I've ever read. It's a very well-written nonfiction piece by Capote about a murder that happens in Kansas, and it actually genuinely happened. He gets quite close to the murderers, and it's just like a very fascinating psychological story. If any of you guys are into sort of like murder mysteries and thrillers, I think I'd absolutely recommend this one as a very easy classic to get into. This is one I definitely want to get to this year. It's Crime and Punishment. Haven't read any Dostoevsky, and like I mentioned, I'd love to read more classics this year, so yeah, this one for sure. Do we like Nathaniel Hawthorne? I have 2 of his books. I haven't ever read them, but they feel so English classy to me, like high school English class, that I don't want to touch them. I have Aloft by Chang Rae Lee here, but I still need to read Native Speaker by him this year, so I think I'm going to put this off another year. Then there's always books I have on my shelf that I definitely read, but I just do not remember them at all. This is one of them, but there's a lot of problematic stuff with this author and stuff, so I'm not really feeling called to it this year, I think. I have a bunch of journals and poetry collections here, not that many, but a couple, and it's just getting me thinking about how I don't read poetry at all, because I haven't actually gotten to most of those. And honestly, I don't think I ever bought them. Like, I never paid for a poetry book. I think I just might have come across them, but it makes me think, should I be reading more poetry? I definitely feel like I should, but there's just something about poetry that doesn't necessarily speak to my soul as a reader right now. And I think a big part of it is that I don't really know how to integrate it into like my reading life. I feel like fiction feels very natural to me. I pick it up, and then whenever I feel a little tired or I've read enough or whatever, there's like a very natural sort of pausing point or pause, I guess. But with poetry, I'm like, are you supposed to read a poem a day? Do you finish a whole poetry book in one sitting? Like, how are these intended to be read? I think is a big confusion I have. And so it's just not something I've delved into. But if you guys have any recommendations of like good books for, you know, people starting out in terms of reading poetry, or however you guys approach reading poetry, I would love to know, because I do think it'd be really nice. Poets are incredible writers, and I love reading fiction by poets, but I just don't love poetry as a medium right now. I just brought this out because someone mentioned it in the comments of my last reading video, and I absolutely love this book. I read it last winter, and it's such a good winter read, so if you're looking for something to read in the next couple of weeks, I definitely recommend it. Here we have some big books. I have not read Ulysses, but this was a gift and I'd definitely like to get to it, but I am just so scared and daunted by it. In terms of A Lucky Man, I absolutely love this collection. I'm really liking to read Witness this year by Jamal as well. These are probably not happening. I still have not read Little Woman though, and I just watched the movie and really liked it, so it's something I'm thinking about for sure. Another book I don't see talked about that much of late was The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida. It won the Booker Prize in 2022, as you can see, and I absolutely love this. It's kind of wacky and kooky and surreal, but it is historical fiction and very energetic prose, and it also talks about the Sri Lankan, I think, civil uprising, civil war maybe, and it's very interesting, a history I didn't really know that well, and I think just he writes about it incredibly well. This is a good time to say that I went through a huge beatnik phase when I was in high school. I think this is a pretty standard thing for people of that age, but I read On the Road, this incredible like kind of beat up copy, and absolutely adored it, and I actually would really like to revisit it because I loved it so much and I was so inspired by the prose. So maybe this one I'm going to take out for this year. But I ended up getting the original scroll version almost as like a relic. And then you can see I have something about Jack Kerouac here, and then the Essential Gisberg, which I did actually read some of his poetry and enjoyed it quite a bit. So yeah. Here we have most of my Korean books that I have, and Korean books are something I really like to buy a physical copy of because I have no e-reader for them, like they can't read on my Kindle, and I don't like to read on like actual screens. And so I really love picking out like sort of Korean books when I'm in Kyobo and stuff to read. I would say the biggest ones that I recommend for any Korean readers are that 문학동네 always does a young writer sort of contest, and then they publish the 10 best stories of that year, and I have loved these. I love them as a translator because they introduce me to a lot of different writers, but also there's just such cool different styles, and it's a really cool variety of short stories that have been sort of vetted and are all really good quality. These 3 books are such a good translated trio. Elena knows, one of my favorite books of all time, Happy Stories Mostly. This is an Indonesian short story collection that I really enjoyed in 2023. Standing Heavy by Gauze, who is a writer from Cote d'Ivoire, about sort of the immigrant life in France, but done in sort of a satirical way, and I really enjoyed this. So yeah. Speaking of languages, we have a bunch of books in French that I have never read. I don't know why, it just feels like such a trek to me to finish a book in French. Definitely read this one. It was a slay, but I have not gotten to any of the other ones yet. But I just hold on to them just in case one day I'm really feeling my French vibes and want to read them. Speaking of French books though, I have a very strange sort of book here in my collection, which is the French translation of Decolonize the Mind by Nguyiwa Thiong'o. I read this in one of my classes when I studied abroad in Paris. It was a class about languages and sort of the power dynamics of languages, and it was really interesting. And this book really sort of changed my life. It's a big reason that I became a translator. I think it's sort of essential reading for anyone who's interested in languages, interested in translation, or writing in different languages. And yeah, it's just a really incredible set of essays, a set of sort of literary criticism, but also like a philosophy about language and writing in your mother tongue, which is what he sort of advocates for, specifically for African writers, and I really enjoyed it. I'll definitely read it in English, which is the language it's originally written in, unless you are a French reader, but I have the French copy. I read Follett a couple years ago, and I think I enjoyed it quite a bit. I really enjoy Bronte's writing in general, and even though this is not Bronte at all, I feel like I have one category of like old British women writers, and I've heard really good things about Middlemarch by George Eliot, so I might try to read that this year, but it is also quite a thick book, so we'll see. And then we have some Henry James and John Steinbeck. Again, I want to read classics this year, but are these the classics that I want to read? I might leave them, even though I haven't ever gotten to them yet. Speaking of poetry, I know this one's such a classic, and it's in this beautiful book gotten at some like used bookstore, and so I think I might read this year. It seems very short. I know this is sort of like a bunch of his most famous poetry, and hopefully I can get to this pretty quickly. So 2025 is for trying new things. I'm looking through some of the classics here, but none of them are really calling my name, so I think I'll leave it. I do want to show off this incredible copy of Slaughterhouse-Five that I have. I definitely would like to reread this at some point. I also really enjoyed this in high school. Another wacky classic that I really enjoyed was Walden and Civil Disobedience by Henry Thoreau. You can see I really annotated that stuff. I just think he's so iconic and speaks very beautifully about nature and like a different form of life. And it's just cool to see how someone was imagining a different way of living, even, at a completely different period of time. And the last thing I want to show you guys is my Small But Mighty Wolf collection. We have 2 of the Bloomsbury editions of Orlando and Jacob's Room here that I got at Waterstones Bloomsbury, and I absolutely love these. The other ones are kind of chaotic. We have an older version of A Room of One's Own, Slay. We have this sort of very popular classic cover of To the Lighthouse, which I also enjoyed, and then this very old copy of a book called Night and Day that I've literally never heard anyone talk about. I haven't read it and I don't think I'll get to it this year, but I'm wondering if it's sort of just an older classic. I'm not really sure. If anyone has heard of Night and Day by Virginia Woolf, let me know. But as you guys probably know, after watching my 2024 reading wrap up, Woolf is one of my favorite writers of all time, and definitely one of those writers that I would like to have their whole canon in physical form so I can revisit her at any point. I think it's not surprising, but the 3 authors I'd like to do that for now are Morrison, Baldwin, and Woolf, and then I think slowly Pinheiro is climbing her way up there, as well as maybe Calvino. I need to read a little bit more of his stuff this year. But actually, this might be a good place to also talk about my sort of book buying habits for the new year, because it's something I'm thinking about. Like I mentioned, I don't think I'm going to be in a permanent space for a while, a couple of years at least. And so I don't necessarily want to have a huge book collection wherever I'm living. But also I do really prefer physical books. And so the library comes in handy there for sure. I tend to be pretty forgiving of myself with book buying, but I used to just sort of buy a book at like a used bookstore or at an independent bookstore whenever I wanted something new to read. But then I ended up with books like this, where I didn't enjoy it at all, and I don't actually feel any attachment to this book, but now I have a physical copy. And honestly, anyone can take this from me, but especially as I've been moving around, especially also as I've been thinking about more mindful consumption and just sort of like my relationship to stuff, because I think moving into a completely new space this year allowed me to realize that I really don't need much. I don't actually like having a lot of stuff and clutter. I think my conclusion now is that there are a couple of categories of books that I do prefer reading physical copies of. Like I mentioned, Korean books, just for ease for me, but also classics is a really big one. I think there's something just very jarring to me, and I think this might be something I could get over, but honestly, do I really want to? No. But there's something very strange to me about reading something that was probably written with like a literal quill on a Kindle. Like, it just does not feel right. I feel like this is not what the author wanted. And I could be totally wrong there. I feel like, there's a natural progression of technology, yes. But also I think it really prevents me from getting super immersed in the story, especially if it's a story that has like very little technology. And often I really like the design that goes into sort of revamped classics. And so I don't mind having their physical copies. I love their font, everything. So on that note, I think this year I'm going to really try buying books physically when they're from independent booksellers that I really love and I just want to support their business and I find a book that I would like to read there, or otherwise books by authors that I absolutely know I want their canons, like I mentioned, Baldwin, Morrison, Woolf, Pinheiro, etc., and or classics that I've been meaning to read. So things like Middlemarch, I'd probably try to find a nice copy of. Otherwise, I'm really going to try to use my library, and then when I'm in Korea, my Kindle as well. So yeah, a perfect example of the book buying habits I'm trying to sort of manifest is this book that I got at a bookstore called Alien and Majesty here in Austin that I absolutely love. It's one of the most unique bookstores I've ever found. It has mostly sort of like translated and small press literature, and I love going there and finding new things. That's where I found like The Earth is Falling last year, which is like a very sort of untalked about book in general, and a lot of books from small presses that deserve more attention for sure. But this time I didn't necessarily get something from a small press. I got Between the Acts by Virginia Woolf, which is apparently her last novel, and it was actually unfinished when she passed, and so people have mixed reviews about it, it seems, on Goodreads and stuff, but I am really excited to read it, and the cover is beautiful, and I sort of love my hodgepodge Woolf collection that I've collected of various covers and styles and copies. So I'm really excited to get to this year at a point where I feel like I need some Woolf, which will probably come at some point when I get bored of everything else. So yeah, excited to find sort of more gems like these in bookstores in 2025. With that being said, I guess this is my 2025 haul for my bookshelf. We've got The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which is, oh my god, I need to tape this cover. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Am I saying his name right? Hopefully. And then Snow by Orhan Pamuk. So yeah, since a lot of my bookshelf was already classics that I'd picked up at like sort of used bookstores, I'm not surprised that this is sort of the content that I get from it, but hopefully I'll be reading a lot of new releases and sort of more contemporary classics on my Kindle and like through the library this year. And yeah, I've just been feeling really energized by all your comments and support on my reading wrap up and also your recommendations and things like that. So I think I'm just super excited for 2025 as a reading year, while also hopefully being more mindful of like physical books and supporting the bookstores that I love. So yeah, with that sort of bookshelf reset, I think I'm going to end this video here. I hope you guys enjoyed talking through some of my goals and thoughts for 2025 with me. I know I said it in the last 2 videos, but I'll say it again here. Thank you so much for making 2024 so special for me. I'm so excited and grateful about this community, and honestly, you guys have given me nothing but very positive energy. And so I feel so lucky, and I hope I can give some of that back to you. Let me know if you have any goals or ins and outs for this year, and if you've kind of gone through your bookshelf recently and sort of finds that you found. And I'll see you guys next week with a new video. Thanks for watching. Bye!